Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our talk. So this is the talk, Server 101. It's an introduction to Tableau Server tools. My name is Rahul Motwani. I'm the Senior Product Manager on the Tableau mobile team, formerly the product manager for some of these server tools.
My name is Dan Rom. I am a software engineer on the product supportability team, as well as the head developer for the TabMon product. And this is a picture of me and my wife about a month ago. Thank you. All right, so before we begin, I think we need to get through some housekeeping items. The main one being the related sessions. So up here are a couple sessions that we think are really good follow-ups to this. And those are Stack the Deck, utilizing Tabjolt and other perf tools, Server Tools 202, capacity planning and load testing with Tabjolt, and Server Tools 203, perf testing using Scout and Replay tool. I also just want to briefly touch on our agenda. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about why Tableau Tools. After that, we're going to go and talk about the support for Tableau Tools a little bit, and then we're going to get into the tools themselves. Once all that's done, we're just going to wrap it up in a nice summary so that we can have an idea of what we went through over this afternoon. Great, so why Tableau Tools? Well, as we all know, Tableau Server is a large product. It's a product that was built to go through and solve and answer a ton of different customer questions. Now, because it's such a large tool and it's so dynamic, there's lots and lots of different configurations that we can go through and set up with Tableau Server. All the tools that you're going to see today are tools that we wrote in-house to go through and help us solve our Tableau Server issues. These tools are all just going to use the data that is provided by Tableau Server, and we're going to utilize Tableau Desktop to view it. That way we can go through and we can self-serve, and we can look into issues, and we can look at our Tableau Server health in general. Great. So Tableau Server tools really fall into two categories. They fall into, one, the community supported, and two, the Tableau supported. Community supported means that the tool itself is kept up by us. Some developers at Tableau, but also the community itself. It also means that the tools generally live on GitHub, and so you can go through and you can access the source code and the installers and everything there. The second is the Tableau supported. What that means is all of the code is written by Tableau engineers. This also means that you can actually file a Tableau or a support ticket with Tableau technical support. Now, I would just want to briefly go through and step into the links below. So the links below are the enterprise tools, the level of support, and just the server administration forums. So I'm just going to jump over there real quick so we get a good idea of what these all have. Great. So this is the server admin tools page that we go through and provide. It's just a high-level view of what tools we have and what questions, how to answer what questions you have. So for instance, if we want to go and talk about load testing, we can go and jump over here, and it should bring us to a page about Tabjolt. The next major page I want to talk about is the support levels for IT. Now, what this really is this is just a further explanation of just what I went over and the different support levels we offer here at Tableau. That way you kind of have a better idea of what tools fall into what categories. The last thing that I want to touch on is just the server administration forums. I bring this up because this is a really good place for this community, for all of us to go through and share our questions and our knowledge and talk to each other. That way we can go through and we can use these tools as efficiently as possible. Great. One moment. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Cool. So now that we got through all the housekeeping items, let's actually go and start talking about the tools themselves. Now, one of my first jobs at Tableau was going through and taking customer issues, generally performance issues, and pulling them apart to go through and further understand, what pain points our customers are hitting, how we can go through and mitigate any performance issues or bottlenecks, and just generally go and look at the performance of Tableau Server. It's through this job we figured out that there's a need to go through and actually monitor the performance of Tableau Server live, thus TabMon. I like to think about TabMon as the Fitbit of Tableau Server. It goes through and it monitors the health of our server environments and it exposes it in a really easy to use way. So we're able just to get a really high holistic view of what is happening in our Tableau Server environments. Now, the reason this is beneficial for us is we're able to go through and at that high level see, how is my server doing? How is everything performing? We can go and spot bottlenecks as well, and we can even spot outages, and sometimes we can spot outages before they even happen. So it's a really good view of what exactly is going on. Now, the way TabMon does this is it goes through and it pulls the PerfMon counters that are exposed by Windows PCs and the Java JMX counters that are exposed by the JVM. It then takes these data points and makes a nice Tableau-friendly data source, and it persists it out to either Postgres or a CSV data source, depending on the configuration settings that you set. Once you have this data source, you can easily go through and combine it with the workbook that we offer to go through and start asking your own questions and digging into the data about your servers. Great, so that's a little bit about TabMon. So let's just talk about what we need in order to actually go through and install and use TabMon, and where do we get it? So the first thing we need is a Windows PC. Currently, TabMon only runs on Windows. We'll need a Tableau Server instance 9.0 or later, and that's because that's when we started exposing JMX counters. And we'll need a Postgres database if we want to go through and expose any sort of historical data at all, because a CSV just isn't built to go through and store historical data. The nice thing about that database, though, is that it's included in the installer. One point that I really, really have to make is please, please, please do not try to persist any of this data to your Tableau Server Postgres backend. That can actually lead to a lot of performance issues because of the amount of data that some of these tools put out. So just please avoid that at all costs. Now, in order to get TabMon, all you have to do is just go to TabMon on GitHub, and you should be able to find the releases and the actual installers for them itself. Now, because TabMon is on GitHub, it means that this is a community-supported tool. While I'll be there to go through and answer questions and help out when I can, it's up to us as a community to go through and support, to work on the tool, to answer questions, and just generally work together to actually use this tool. But because it's also on GitHub, we were able to go through and share some awesome knowledge like our user guide. Our user guide is a really good way to start off using TabMon. It has everything you need from configuring your Tableau server to work properly to configuring TabMon to work properly. Great, so now that we talked a little bit about what is TabMon, how it works, how do we get it, I just want to go through and start stepping into some workbooks, or at least the workbook that we bundle with this. So what you're going to see in this workbook is you're going to see a high-level view of what is exactly happening within your Tableau server environment. One of the coolest dashboards that we actually have with this workbook is called What's Going On. Now, if you go through and you enable read-only access to your Tableau server database, what we can actually go and do is we can blend the data from TabMon with your server data to go through and figure out when we have performance hiccups or things like that, what's happening within the actual environment itself. So it looks something like this. So say we want to go through and we want to look at this spike over here. We can go and we can drag and drop, and we can see what happened exactly at that moment. Well, it looks like we deleted some workbooks, some people logged in, we updated a project or two. But what you can really see is the number one thing we did is delete a bunch of workbooks. So if we go and jump into there, we can actually go and see the resources that we're using to do this. And just like we saw with this graph up here where Backgrounder is using the most resources, you can see that Backgrounder is being fairly heavily used to go through and delete old deprecated workbooks. Now, this isn't the only data that TabMon goes and exposes for you guys. It also actually exposes a lot of granular host level stuff, so things like CPU utilization. Like we talked about earlier, this view itself has a lot of Backgrounder activity, so we can see right here that Backgrounder is using almost all of the CPU. So While the host level knowledge is really nice, I think it's also really cool to go and step into the JMX counters and what's actually happening within Tableau Server. So I'm going to go and jump over to our cache hits and miss analysis. So this view gives us a good idea of how our caching is working, how often we're hitting the cache. And that way, when we go through and we tune our caching and the amount of processes that we have to cache, we can go and we can actually see real time, basically, how it's affecting us. Great. All right, so that's a little bit about TabMon. Now, if TabMon is the Fitbit of the Tableau Server tools, I like to think of Tabjolt as the treadmill. Tabjolt is a tool that's built to go through and put stress on our servers. It's meant to go and work it as hard as it can, so that way we can collect some metrics on it and see how it's performing. This helps us because we're able to identify bottlenecks. We're able to figure out whether or not our server is configured properly. And generally, we can just get a really quick view as to how is my server operating. The nice thing about the workbook and the data that is exposed by this tool is that it's historical. So every time you run one of these, you're going to go and see the data stack up within Postgres, and you can compare run to run, so you know over time how exactly your Tableau Server instance is performing. Now, Tabjolt does this. Tableau goes through and it puts stress on your server by first going through and loading a series of views. Now, you can either do this two ways. You can either use a CSV where you personally say, I would like it to go and look at these views to see how those are performing. Or the tool can go through and explore itself and figure out what views you have and randomly access those. Once it knows these, it uses the users that you have in Tableau Server to generate a synthetic load where it loads workbooks and it works with those workbooks, and it generally just uses Tableau the way you would think that we, the users, would use Tableau. Once that's done, all of that data is persisted out to Postgres, and that data can be seen within the actual workbook that's included within Tabjolt. So now that we know about Tabjolt, let's yet again step into what do I need in order to run Tabjolt, and where do I get it? So yet again, Tabjolt runs on a Windows PC. We need Tableau Server 9.0 or later, and this is just because that's when we expose the JMX counters. We also need the Postgres database and Java 64-bit. Both of these are included in the installer, and yet again, my big note, please do not persist this to Tableau Server's backend database. You can really do some damage to your server if you do that. Once you have all this stuff knocked out, just go and get it on GitHub, and it's super easy to install. Now, because it's on GitHub, we do go through and we provide user docs so that you can go and kind of step into this and start looking at this. But we also go through and we provide these YouTube videos. These YouTube videos are a really good way to get an overview of what the tool is, how do we get started with the tool. And it even goes in and steps into how do I analyze the data that is produced by this tool. Because this tool, yet again, lives on GitHub, it means it's community supported. It's supported by all of us. Now, there are Tableau employees that go and work on this product and push releases and update. But we're not the only people who work with this. So any questions or issues can be answered by the community as a whole. Great. So yet again, I want to go through and step into the Tabjolt workbook. Now, in this workbook, what we're going to see is a series of KPIs. So a series of measurements that we take while we're putting load on these servers. And it's going to be displayed out in this really nice fashion. So the first page that we're going to see here is the key performance indicators. Now, the cool thing about this is you can actually see all the runs that I've done against my server and the various lengths. You can also go and see the different statistics, the different stats, the amount of workbooks that are loaded, the users that are loaded, that sort of information right here. So this is just a good way to go and look at what happened during my load test. The other nice thing about this view, too, is it just gives you this long graph where you can kind of compare these response times of the tests per length over time. And so you can see the longest test that I ran was a 40-minute test, and you can see right around 30 minutes is when that max load hit that server, and when things started to not necessarily tip over, but it started to feel that stress. Great. So the next thing that we're going to go and look at is the actual test response time. This is really interesting because what it does is it shows the actual response time of different actions and different views throughout the tests. It also shows when a test fails and when a test passes. One thing I'd really like to point out is I made sure there was a lot of broken views on my Tableau server when I made this data, just because I wanted you guys to get a clear idea as to what happens when you have workbooks that aren't working properly. So I would not expect all of your servers to have that much red. So I just want to point that out. Cool. The next little bit that I want to look at is the test drill down. This view is also super useful because we can actually go and see what happened within our tests and what kind of response that we got through it. So if you go and you look at the long test I ran, right around here is where we start seeing that 30-minute mark where you hit the maximum load and things start slowing down. So if we go through and we just highlight this, if we go through and we highlight this, you can start to see, well, these are the different actions that were run at that time. And if we want to know, okay, well, what happened at a certain action and what was slow, we can actually go and start drilling into it like this, for instance. And we can see that, sorry about that. We can actually see that the bootstrap itself was what was generating that much time. So that means just the general end-to-end load is what was causing, or is what took so long in that load. So that's just a good quick step into what you can expect with Tabjolt and the Tabjolt workbook.
Thanks, Dan. So before we step into the next section, just want to let you guys know, I see a lot of people taking pictures of the slides and the resources. The handout that's been given to you has everything that you need, so you can just sit back, relax, and just enjoy the presentation. So with that, let's step into the next section of tools. It's the log analysis and troubleshooting section, and I'll cover Logshark and Tableau Log Viewer for you. So just quick poll in the room. How many of you are server admins for your Tableau Server installations? Cool, that's a great number. And how many of you would love to self-service some of the issues that you see with Tableau Server by yourself without having to contact Tableau support? Great, some of you. So the next set of tools should help you achieve that goal. So picture this scenario, okay? You are the IT admin for your Tableau Server installation, and you happen to be in sort of the financial sector or the healthcare sector. And we know that these sectors have some really high data governance policies or procedures, as well as they have some federal laws that they have to stick by. Your boss's Wiz is not loading, and he needs to go into this executive meeting, and he comes to you running, and he's like, you need to make this Wiz load and figure out what the problem is. But you're kind of caught between a hard place and a rock because you can't share those logs with Tableau support to help you troubleshoot those issues. So there comes in Logshark. So what does Logshark do? Logshark basically is a tool that parses your log files, and we have what we call plugins, but think of plugins as sort of filters for each of your components of Tableau Server. These plugins go and extract the relevant events from these log files, and we write it out to a Postgres database. Actually, let me correct that. We don't write it out to a Postgres database anymore. I'm taking my thunder away from what I want to announce later. We write it out to a data source, and from that, you can construct workbooks that will help you, figure out error conditions that are happening on your Tableau server or performance bottlenecks that you're hitting. So that is, in a nutshell, what Logshark is. So how is it beneficial to you all as users? The first one is, if you see any error conditions on your Tableau server, the thing that you most often do is you go and look at the logs. So this tool will help you kind of visualize those logs in Tableau, and we all know that Tableau is a tool that you all love to use. The second scenario is more around, going back to that exposing sensitive data from your organizations. So, we're trying to enable you to self-service some of these issues. So, you can look at your own logs with these tool sets and try to pinpoint what the issues are without having to send us those logs. And the third scenario happens to be around sort of upgrade testing. So here's how you can envision using Logshark for this scenario. What you would do is you have an existing server that you're running right now within your organization. Say, let's call that kind of like server A, right? you run your typical workload of workbooks and just users accessing your server on that server. You collect a set of logs for the predefined time period that you think you're going to have like the typical workload for, and you run those logs through Logshark. And let's say it produces a set of workbooks A. What you do is in your sandbox or pre-production environment, hopefully it's mimicking the same topology that you have for your existing production environment. You run the same workload through that server, collect your logs, and run that through Logshark, and let's call that set B. Now what you can do easily is compare set A and B, and that'll help you determine, like, are you running into specific error conditions? Is your performance getting degraded when you're going from one version to another version? Even if you change like a config value within your YAML file, right? You can quickly do this kind of A/B comparison between those two runs to see, is it really worth your while to upgrade? Is the performance getting better or worse? So that's even how we use it within Tableau internally. So just some quick prerequisites. It is only on Windows for now. We require Tableau Server 9.0 and higher. And it does require Mongo. We do include Mongo with the installer. Just one quick caveat that the local Mongo installer that we include with it is good for log sets of 2 gigabytes and lower. And as you all may know, that the server log sets are much larger than that. So best practice would be to set up your own Mongo database. Now, the news that I was getting to was we just released, this is hot off the press as of last week, we released version 3 of Logshark, in which we have removed the dependency on Postgres. So if any of you have used Logshark in the past, we used to require you to use a Postgres database as well. We have now converted that, and we write them out to the hyper format. So one of the big pain points we heard from a lot of the IT admins was they didn't want to have an additional Postgres server to install for this. Well, we heard your feedback, and we've reacted to it, and we're giving you an updated version that no longer requires Postgres, so you can just use Hyper. And like we all know, Hyper is pretty performant, so you should see the benefit of not only the Logshark runs processing much faster, but also the workbooks loading much faster. Outlined over there is where you can get Logshark. It's on the Tableau's GitHub repo. And we all know Logshark is a pretty complicated tool to use. It does require a little bit of hand-holding, so we've taken extensive measures to ensure that we've given you a great setup and installation guide, and it's referenced over there on the GitHub site as well. As all the other tools that we're presenting, this one too is a community-supported tool. We write different plugins to support different scenarios for the various server components, but we expect that as our user base, that is you, uses the tool and comes across specific scenarios that you need new plugins for, feel free to clone the repo and try to develop a plugin. We want to make this like a community where we can all share and develop and share the goodness with everyone else that's kind of using this tool. So I strongly encourage you to do that. And again, we constantly monitor the GitHub site for any issues and requests. We may not be as quick to respond to it. Sometimes we're in crunch mode, but we try to get to it as soon as we can so we can unblock you. With that, I wanted to go through some of the workbooks that are generated by Logshark. So the first one I want to show you is the Apache plugin. And what this is basically showing you is it shows you the HTTP interactions with Tableau Server, as well as some of the error codes that you see when we're making those requests to load the initial workbook. So in this workbook, on the left-hand side, what you're seeing is some of the most frequently loaded or used workbooks. So you can kind of get a profile for like what workbooks are being slammed more, and maybe that's what's contributing to your performance degradation. In this kind of the top left, you're basically seeing the load over a period of time or a duration or a week. So as you can see, on that particular day, which is October 31st, right? This is from last year, but still relevant, is you had a pretty high load of like 174 workbooks being loaded. So it kind of gives you a sense of how the traffic patterns on your server look like, from week to week. And down below, what it's showing you is sort of the average load time. across the same time period. So you can kind of get a sense for which are the days that are, you have maybe more user load, and that may be the start of investigation for you. The next one, Workbook, that's again a part of the Apache plugin, is this view. And this is taking it a level deeper, so getting a little bit more granular with that investigation. So again, on the left, you see, again, the most frequently loaded workbooks. But then on the top right over here, you see sort of how long is it taking for that initial load of the workbook, right? So I can see over here, like, most of these happen to load pretty quickly. But then over here on this date, there are some requests that are really taking a lot of time to load. One other great thing that we do with these workbooks is we extract all of the information from the logs into these tooltips, which make it much easier for you as an admin to start your investigation. So you can see the specific request, as well as like it took 1,800 seconds to execute. You can see the error code, the specific workbook and worksheet, as well as the session ID, and the request ID. So looking at that information itself, it gives you a starting point, to go look into your logs, because logs are really large, and you don't know. You're kind of like you're feeling like you're trying to find like this really tiny needle in a haystack. So this kind of helps you really hone in on a specific request, a specific workbook that may be the cause of the issue. Down below over here, you also see sort of the HTTP error code responses. So your typical 200s are all good, but then you might see a 400 error response or a 500 that you may need to investigate. The one last workbook that I want to show you, and this is the reason why I want to highlight this one is this one came in from, actually, Dan used to work on the supportability engagement team. That's the team that kind of handles a lot of the tech support requests when they get really escalated to the engineering team. And one of the things he said to us when he was on that team was, it would be great if you could generate sort of a heat map of where are the peak periods of time when we're seeing real bad performance issues, right? So what we did is in this view, what you're seeing on the top view over there is we're bucketing your request times, and we're letting you do that based on a configurable threshold. And that way it shows you sort of like over a period of time, what are the peak periods where you're seeing performance kind of go below or above that threshold, right? So the red is it's going above that threshold and it's bad, you need to look at it. And the green is it's kind of meeting your threshold requirements. So right now the threshold is set to like 4 seconds, but notice if I say like 2 seconds is what is acceptable as your admin, or that's what acceptable within your organization. You can quickly just hit 2 over there, and you can see how the heat map just changed. So you're seeing more of the oranges and the reds, which means performance is bad, and less of the greens. So that was the Apache plugin. The next one I want to show you is the Server Resource Manager plugin. So Server Resource Manager was what was introduced in Tableau Server 9.2. And what this basically does is it's an admin setting, and it's turned on by default. But you can set, as an admin, you can define what is sort of the threshold for some of the resources like CPU and memory that you'd like to set it to. And what the Server Resource Manager component does is when it hits that threshold, say you've set CPU to 95%, right? When it hits that threshold, what it will do on the server side is it automatically refreshes the resource, right? Or it'll kill that resource and kind of spawn it again. So what this plugin does is it's kind of showing you the CPU and memory utilization across all your worker nodes on your server. The line in the red that you see on the top, and I'm going to hover above it right now, is it's telling you that the SRM CPU for that particular worker node was set to 95%. So it's kind of showing you what threshold you've established, and then how are you performing against that threshold. And at the bottom over here, you basically are seeing some of the processes that were terminated as a result of exceeding that threshold. So you can kind of, if you see a lot of the backgrounders getting refreshed and recycled very quickly, that may be an indicator for you to do something about that. Maybe you need to add more CPU, you need to add more RAM so that you don't hit so many of those refreshes. So that was at a quick overview, Logshark. And like I said, these are only 2 of the plugins I've highlighted. There are many other plugins that we have, like the Hyper plugin that kind of works on the Hyper logs, and we have an admin config plugin that kind of shows you all your config values for, that you set in your YAML file. So use it, and keep sending us feedback on what's missing and try to contribute to the community as well. Covered that. So the next tool that I want to move to is Tableau Log Viewer. So again, you guys are IT admins. You probably run into a lot of issues. And isn't it fun when you have to look at those server logs in Notepad? Not right? Okay. So this tool should be a lifesaver for you because what it basically does is it lets you view those horrendous text log files in a tool in a really nice columnar format, so it's easy for you to grok that information. So like it says over there, it works on both desktop as well as server JSON logs. It also has this cool feature built in where you can visualize some of the queries, and I'll show you how that works. And the best part about this tool is one of the few tools that Tableau supports cross-platform, so it works on both Windows and OS X, and it also works on Linux. So that's great. Benefits, it's pretty obvious. You get to see it not in Notepad, you get to see it in a cool tool. And then it lets you identify some of those error conditions that happen much more easily. You can highlight and query and filter. And the query visualization function that is built in also lets you kind of tune your workbook performance by looking at some of those queries, and it may give you hints to what you can do with it. So like I said, it works on Windows as well as the Mac platform. You can download it on the GitHub site. The links, again, are in your sheets that you have. There's a really good wiki about this that you can look at, and it kind of walks you through some of the basic setup and a good FAQ section. This tool is community supported as well. We do look at the GitHub site for issues on and off and try to help you and unblock you. So with that, I'll switch to a quick demo of the tool. So I'm just going to highlight some of the functions and functionality of the tool, but feel free to explore more of it by yourself by downloading the tool. The one new thing that's got released with this update of the tool last week is, in addition to sort of the regular menu structure, they've also exposed some of the most frequently used commands on this really cool sort of a ribbon or whatever you want to call it. So you can quickly just hit this instead of hitting the shortcut keys or trying to futz with the menu to see where they are. So like I said, you can quickly find, so if I want to search for locale, it kind of just takes me to the next place where it finds that. I can hit,
There's only one in there.
oh, there's only one in there. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I want to, the other thing I wanted to show you is you can quickly highlight certain specific key value pairs that you want to highlight. So in this, if I want to look for locale info, which is there, I can also hit the function, you can go ahead by using the F4 and Shift F4 keys to quickly navigate. So you can see over there, it's highlighted the locale info key pair for me. And then when you double click on it, it shows you quick information about the locale, what the number format is, what the date format is. So if you happen to be investigating issues around why certain calculations are appearing or not appearing in the way they're supposed to appear, looking at the number format may be a clue for you. Maybe the locale was set incorrectly on that workbook and you're looking at it in a different locale. The other benefit of this is also it has a mode called live mode. So it understands when you're on a desktop machine and you click on live mode, it knows which log directory it should be monitoring. As long as you've not switched with the defaults, it knows to go to your log folder on the machine, and it'll constantly show you the logs as they're coming in real time, so you can monitor things in real time. The other benefit of this that I wanted to highlight was the visualize query functionality. So I believe you need to have certain settings enabled on your server to be able to do this. And I can talk to you offline about that. But once you do that, you will see sort of these logical query events being written to the log. And when you double click on this, what it's first showing you is exactly the query that it ran. So it makes it easier for you to debug, because you can probably just copy this query and try to run it separately in SQL or whatever else that you want to run it on. And then I'm not going to click on visualize query because that's an intensive operation right now, and it'll just freeze for a little bit. So for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to exclude that. But you can basically, for those events that are the logical query ones, you should be able to click the visualize query event, and it basically shows you a really nice visualization of like the joins that happened and how that query executed. So sometimes when you're doing performance optimization on workbooks, that's a great functionality for the admins to have. So now moving on to the next section. So this section is around perceived performance and error validation. And the tool that we want to cover is Scout. So again, I'm going to picture this scenario with me as an IT admin. The new version of Tableau Server is out. And now everyone in the organization is after your life to upgrade to the latest and greatest because it has some feature in there that they want to use. And now you're getting all of these emails from everyone to upgrade. But you also know that if you upgrade and things go south when someone's workbook doesn't load, it's going to be kind of, you who's going to get those emails again saying my workbooks are not loading. So you're kind of now caught again between a hard place and a rock, which kind of seems to be a common theme for admins. So what do you do then? You're getting this pressure, but you want to make sure like the existing workbooks are not only loading correctly with all of the data source changes that may happen, but you also don't want to affect performance. So that's a scenario where Scout can be really useful for you. So what Scout basically is, it's sort of an exploratory test tool that interacts with both Tableau Server and desktop. And what it does is it records performance metrics for specific user actions on a given set of workbooks. Now, since these user actions can also work on workbooks, it also lets you do some sort of like user acceptance testing on them. So yeah, so some of the benefits are user acceptance testing. So if you're changing particular config values on the server and you just want to vet like, okay, is this going to go well or not? You can kind of use Scout to do some of that user acceptance testing to make sure the dashboards are loading properly after upgrades. There's no, or you've changed the data source and you want to know like, is it going to have any down level ramifications? You can use Scout to do that. And then also for performance testing, it really helps you sort of do this A/B comparison. Again, what you would do is you would run Scout with that set of workbooks before the upgrade. And then you would run Scout again on the upgraded version and kind of see where the difference lies between the workbook loads. So what are the prerequisites for this? This is again available on Windows. It works on Tableau Server 10.0 and higher. It requires Google Chrome because it's one of those tools that does the exploratory testing. So it requires, as it's running, it loads up Chrome and it loads the workbooks to make sure they're loading fine, and it captures some metrics from that. And it does require the Java 64-bit VM. You can get it from our community site. It's not on GitHub, just one note. Again, it has a really good user guide as well as a getting started video that you can look at to get yourself up and running. It is a community supported tool, so we do monitor the forums as well as the community site for any issues that come up, and we try to respond to them as quickly as we can. The one highlight that I want to make for Scout, which is again something that we recently released, I think a week or 2 weeks ago, is earlier we would only let you save the results out in a CSV format, but as of the latest release, we also let you save it to a Postgres format. So that was another ask that a lot of the users and admins had. Since we're presenting from a Mac machine, I really don't have, since it's only Windows, I can't show you the UI of the tool, but I quickly wanted to walk you through the screenshot of what the tool looks like. So what you're seeing over there in the upper left-hand corner for you is that's where you put in the server against which you want to test. And you put in the credentials that you want to use. The next section is sort of talking about the workbook discovery mode. So what this basically is doing is you're telling the tool what is the set of workbooks you want to use for your performance testing. And there are two modes. One is automatic, so you just like, okay, pick whichever workbooks you want. And the next one is you can specify a list of workbooks as a text file. So when you select URL list, you can see below there is a button that's kind of grayed out that has the URL list that way you can specify, and it takes a text file. So you can say, these are the links of all the workbooks that I want to load. The next section is kind of talking about whether you want to do this testing in edit mode versus view mode. And most people tend to use it from view mode because that's where you see most of your users accessing the workbooks. And the other functionality I want to highlight is where it says the workbook discovery mode, you have an alphabetical or most used option. You probably want to go with the most used option because that's the one, those are the workbooks that are being accessed more frequently on your Tableau Server environment. So you want to use that rather than just using, alphabetical list. I think the rest is pretty self-explanatory. You can save the server logs. We just recommend you use all the interactions, though you can choose specific interactions that you want to exercise over there. So with that, I want to show you.
Skip straight to QA.
Oh, are we almost out of time? No, we have.
Yeah. Oh wait, never mind. Sorry.
We have.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I mistimed it.
Yep. Okay, so with that, I want to show you some of the workbooks that are generated by Scout. So what you're seeing here is, we've selected a bunch of workbooks that we want to perform this run on. And for each of these workbooks, you're seeing the different interactions that are allowed. So this one is just the server load interaction. And you can see over here when I click on one of these, how long it took, and then which are the workbooks, the top 10 slow workbooks for this sort of interaction, right? So, this particular workbook took the longest. It took 15 seconds. So that may be something that you need to investigate when you're doing this performance test, is that particular interaction is taking long on this workbook. The other one that, actually, let me go back here. So this is the view that you get when you're running this performance test on a day-to-day basis. You can see how the results are changing as you're upgrading a version or you're changing some setting. What you're seeing over here is we had 2 different runs on 2 different days. And this is sort of like the A/B comparison of how many errors you saw on one day versus the next day. So when you go to this section and you go to the error summary, you can see what was the success and failure for that particular run across the various interactions. And then drilling down further, you can see the error count by the workbooks, as well as the error counts by each of the interactions that you performed. And then the last one that I wanted to show you was sort of that A/B comparison that I told you, where you can use this for upgrade testing when you're going from one version to another version. And this was also something that we used very extensively, this tool. Last year, when we were replacing the TDE with Hyper, we used this pretty extensively for internal testing, where we ran a set of workbooks using TDE, and then we ran the same workload using Hyper to see were we really pushing things in the right direction with respect to performance. So what you're seeing over here is for that set of workbooks, how did they perform on both the servers? So what you're seeing over here is some of these workbooks, the performance really degraded, and you can see the percentages and the amounts by which they degraded. So this is showing you the number of seconds. That's the delta between run A and run B, as well as the percentage. But then as you scroll, it's in the wrong. Yes, as you scroll down, you see that, there's a reverse happening with other set of workbooks where performance is actually better on server B versus server A. So that gives you a good starting point for your investigation as to what do you want to optimize. Are there certain workbooks that you want to choose to optimize? Is one better than the other? And then this one is showing you again a little bit more granular view into the same sort of high-level overview that I showed you earlier. This is for each of the workbook. It looks at each worksheet within that workbook, and it breaks it down by every interaction. So for every interaction, you can see how it was for A as well as B, and where those deltas are. So if there are specific workbooks that are the most frequently used, that the execs are using and they're showing a performance degradation, maybe that's where you start your investigation with and try to optimize those and then kind of work down the list. Yeah, I think that's, and this sort of is a very high level comparison analysis. So it's showing you like, there were 46 errors when you ran, on A, and then there were 40 when you ran on B. So sort of the different errors between A and B is around 16. And then you can dive down into each of the workbooks and worksheets to see exactly what those errors were. And I'm not going to click on these links because these workbooks are not on my machine right now, but it does have these tooltips built into each of the runs. And if you click on these links, it'll actually open the workbook and also open a screenshot of what it saw when it did that run. So it's easy for you from this workbook itself to see the comparison on A and B at the same time. Okay, so I didn't tell you this before, but there's a pop quiz to make sure if you guys were paying attention. So let's test out. So I'm going to shout out a scenario, and if you were paying attention, you're going to give me the answer to this correctly. You cannot send logs to Tableau Server for investigation. How do you self-service your issues? Logshark, great. Next scenario. This app kind of allows you to do some of the content app validations during upgrades. Perfect. The third one is you can monitor Tableau Server utilization and health. We also call this the Fitbit. TabMon. Great, you were paying attention. This is a cross-platform tool that enables visualizing Tableau Server queries. Log viewer, correct. And last but by no means least, it helps you with synthetic load testing and capacity planning for your server. Tabjolt, great. You all passed. So in summary, we walked you through some of the tools that will enable you to self-service the issues that you see on Tableau Server. I can't emphasize enough, these are the tools that we have used internally within Tableau on a day-to-day basis. And it's when we found use for these tools internally have we made these available externally to all of you because we think it will enable you to self-service a lot of your issues. And it also shows you how Tableau uses Tableau to solve some of our problems. So with that, I'll leave you with the slides. These are the summary slides that you already have the printouts for in front of you. Again, a great resource for you to use is the IT Tools website on tableau.com, and you can look at the support levels and what it means. A quick recap, if you've liked one of the tools that we presented to you in this session, there are some advanced sessions for those tools. I would look at your TC18 app for the most updated rooms and times. And before you all step out of the room, please, 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 fill out the survey for this session in your TC18 app. It is great feedback for us to get and know what we need to improve on for future such sessions. And this is also used by the TC Planning Committee to decide if these are sessions we should be having next year. So if you found value in this session, please leave us feedback. And with that, we can open it up to some Q&A. Yeah. So the question was, most of these tools are Windows-based. If you had a Tableau Server Linux installation, can you use these at all? Okay. Is there a specific tool you're talking about, or in general across all?
It looked like the only one that was cross-platform.
Yeah. So yes and no. For certain tools like like Logshark, it doesn't run on a Linux box. But what you can do is you can take logs from your Linux machine and still run it on a machine that has Logshark, that is on Windows. So there is that. What we're also trying to do is, we've heard this, so you're not the first person asking for this, clearly because we've released Linux Server. What we're trying to do is we're trying to identify at this point what functionality from these tools we can try to incorporate either into a tool or directly into a server on Linux. So that's something that we're actively investigating.
Tabjolt can be run against your Linux server.
Yeah, so Tabjolt can. Yeah, so Tabjolt, the way it works is it's just going to go and load the URLs, and it's just going to collect JMX. And so since you don't actually need to be physically on the Linux server, you can actually run Tabjolt against a Linux box as well. So most of the tools here, if they don't offer it now, they have some sort of support and something on the roadmap to hopefully go and catch them up soon.
Yeah.
You over here. Let's.
If I wanted to, on a Tableau server running on Linux, if I wanted to view CPU usage by site, how would you go?
All right, so the question is if on a Tableau server on Linux, if you wanted to view CPU on site, correct?
Yeah,
Per site.
For each site. So I don't necessarily know how we could break that down at the site level. JMX is nice because it not only exposes things like session count and stuff, it'll actually go through and it'll show you some of the metrics, like some of the performance metrics of the actual JVM itself, so things like CPU and whatnot. So while I don't know if you can get it by site, if you have your server broken down, you can definitely go through and you could actually probably use TabMon to go and pull those JMX counters. It wouldn't pull anything perf-wise. But you could actually go through and start looking at the CPU for the JVM and what processes are using what. And so I think that's like the best answer we have right now. Cool.
Can you automate any of these?
So I guess the question is, can you automate any of these? Can you alert any of them? Well, all of them go through and output different data sources. So we do have viz alerts, which means that if you went through and you scripted out the automation of some of these tools, you could go through and have it upload or update, and you could have a refresh on Tableau Server that could then go through and give you some sort of viz alert when things change.
So the tools itself, the only one that works on Linux directly, like on a Linux.
Against, if you have a Windows backend Tableau web server versus a Linux version of Windows, Linux versus Windows for that, which tools work?
So the question is, if you have a Linux Tableau Server instance versus a Windows Tableau Server instance, what tools would work with Linux? I think TLV would work.
Like
Tabjolt should work properly. Scout, I believe, should work because that's pointing at URLs, isn't it?
Yeah, we might have
Yeah.
to get back to you on that one about Scout, but like I.
Is it listed somewhere?
Yes,
Yeah.
it should. And all of those on the GitHub sites, they generally tell you what level of interactivity they have with Linux. And then if you have further questions, you can just ask on GitHub, and then we can answer those for you. And yeah, work with
But
you
like
that
I
way.
said, the other scenario where like I know Logshark doesn't work on Linux like you can't put it on a Linux box to run the processing of logs. What you can do is get the logs from the Linux machine and then run it on a Logshark that is on a Windows machine.
So I'm new to Tabjolt, so I don't have all the context for this, but if we want to test a production server because it has more horsepower than dev, is there any best practices or no-nos to make sure we don't tank our production server?
So in general, the best practices don't do it on your production.
If you are going to do it on your production, schedule downtime. Don't do it while
Yeah.
people are using it, because the point of a load test is to put load on it, and that's just not good user experience. So.
But definitely look at, I believe there might be some white papers or even those videos that were listed and that's in the handout that we gave you. Those can be a good starting point for you to decide how to do that.
Got it, thanks.
I think we have one over here as well.
At large banks and financial institutions, downloading GitHub is the big no-no. 99.9% of the time, it's always fine, but that's 0.1% amount of risk for the date. The journey plan, if you had simply moved this code from GitHub to your own site on tableau.com/sandbox something, we'd be able to download it specifically with your wait behind it. If something did go wrong, we got it from your site, we were able to support a journey plan.
There are
Yeah,
discussions.
we have plenty of discussions about these tools.
I mean, the reason, so I totally understand where you're coming from on that. I mean, but Tableau's GitHub site is also owned by Tableau. So it's not like we're just throwing something out there. And the other thing I want to clarify is that is why we have those, we've clearly defined the level of support for each of these tools. So, some of these tools are community supported and we do not support them at all. I mean, in the sense that you can't open a Tableau support ticket, but we as developers on the team, our goal is to help you guys as Tableau users. So we will do our best to monitor the forums and get you unblocked. But then there are tools out there on the GitHub side that are Tableau supported. So, some things like the extensions API and stuff, they're completely supported and you can use those. So, but it's totally valid feedback, and that's something that we're working on to see how we can bring more of this functionality into Tableau Server so that, enterprises that have really high, strict IT governance don't have to install separate tools to get the same benefits.
Cool. So I think over here. So.
Just a more clarification question. I know you mentioned not to use an inbuilt Postgres database, right?
Yes.
So the suggestion is to have a separate Postgres database on which these tools can be used. Is that correct?
Yes. So the question is, I pointed out that you should never go through and put any of this data in a Postgres backend database for Tableau Server. The answer is yes, please don't ever do that. Our recommendation is go through and either stand up the Postgres that comes with these products or go through and set up your own Postgres instance. You can set it up however you want, and generally we give you the SQL scripts to go through and configure them to work with our products. And so because most of them are on GitHub as well, you can generally look at the SQL we use to access things, and so you get a better idea as to what we're doing when we're writing to your Postgres instance.
Yes.
I have an off-topic a little bit. I hear a lot about Linux servers and things like that. Is it worth investigating that? Is it performing better, or is it just not worry about it?
I think it depends on, is it worth investigating Linux server or not?
Yeah.
I think it depends from organization to organization. There's some organizations that were just Linux shops. So their request to us was like, hey, you don't have Tableau Server for Windows, we can't use you, right? So that was one of the reasons.
Yeah, I
I
think
would say your mileage may vary based on what specific scenario you're looking to, to use with Tableau Server.
Trying to figure out if it's worthwhile to go to it. I'm sure somebody can answer in the audience.
We switched because we put more memory on our Linux servers.
You put more memory on it.
Yeah. That one.
Yeah, and actually, one of the considerations that you may want to think about is what data sources your users are
Yeah.
going to be using.
Mhm.
Because Linux has a restricted set of data sources that the drivers for which the drivers are available. So that should be one of your big considerations.
I would say it's
Depends.
when we released it, our goal was the same. Basically, we want it to be comparable all the way across. So, like everything else, you can tune it and you can work with it and change the configurations to increase performance. I would say that it shouldn't be any slower than Windows, and if it is, then you should start filing support tickets because that needs to be
Well,
fixed.
it also depends on what hardware configuration you're using to set up those servers. So if you're talking about the exact, apples to apples, then yeah, it should be the same.
I am finding the latest one with the new, whatever the ESM backend is.
Yeah.
It's a little slower than the previous business.
Okay.
I don't know if it's our setup, if we don't have a server, or if that's in general what everyone else is. It's noticeably slower.
If that's the case, I highly recommend going and talking to our support team. They are a gateway to go through and start looking into stuff like that. And so the more metrics we have on that, the more weight we have behind solving those issues. And if we see that that's a big problem, then we're going to go and we're going to put a lot of weight behind that and try to get that fixed.
Is that a pretty good investment?
It's a
So if we're going to really call support on and say,
yeah,
done something bad here.
Yeah.
totally. So cool.
Okay. I think we're out of time, but thank you so much for stopping by the session.
And if anyone has any questions, I'll stick around by the doors and answer them. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and those are